Today, I've got not one, not two, but three different styles of free hit draft to set you up perfectly for Game Week 29 in FPL. Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and today I thought I'd break the status quo slightly because I think we're going to see a lot of FPL content out there this week, which is all focused on basically the same free hit draft. For anyone who's on a free hit in Game Week 29, I think it's probably going to get a bit dull. Yes, there's an optimal way of playing it, and yes, it will be very popular. But I think there are different ways you can look at playing it and actually different ways of attacking the free hit in Game Week 29. So that's what this video is going to aim to do. We are going to run through the optimal, in inverted commas, free hit team. The one that probably I would set up with if I wanted to be safest, the one that I think on average scores the net highest points. So it is probably the sensible play. Then we're going to have a look at the all-in free hit draft. Now, that is a different type of setup. I'll explain that when I get to it, but there will be tweaks to what would be normally considered the ideal setup for a free hit in Game Week 29 based on what you think is going to happen that week. Then number three, a bit more classic again. I'm going to run through 15 different differentials that I think are just not being spoken about enough, and maybe not the whole 15 you're wanting to include in your free hit draft for Game Week 29, but maybe 2, 3, maybe even 4 of them are going to tempt you. And I'm going to run through them all and hopefully pick out a few that in your team you might want to use to attack free hit 29 with just a bit more flavor to it. So let's not spend too long on what I would consider to be the best looking free hit draft. We're going to see this everywhere this week, and with good reason, to be fair. I think there are certain players that do kind of pick themselves. Son Heung-min, Maddison, Bowen, even Watkins up front, probably Tony as well, are all going to be in a lot of free hit drafts this week because they are talismanic figures in the clubs that you'd expect on average to do well against weaker opposition in Game Week 29. There are obviously only 4 fixtures, so really you only want to be targeting a very select amount of optimal players that on average score the most points. Now, Son being on penalties, the same goes with Tony and Morris as well. Those are going to be 3 very popular picks this week. But then even outside of that, Ollie Watkins, 31 attacking returns in just 28 game weeks. And then again, outside of that, you've got Bowen, who's having a sensational season at the moment. Maddison, who's looked better and better since coming back from injury. Probably a little bit slow to get back to full fitness, but he is certainly looking like the ideal pick for that second Spurs midfielder at the moment, if Richarlison isn't fit, which at the moment we just don't know. Then Bailey as well. Minutes are a little bit of a risk, and he did get taken off quite early in Game Week 28. But again, if you want to go full attack, you could either look at Bailey or Douglas Luiz, who is on penalties, but his away from home data, and as you can see, West Ham away from home for Aston Villa in Game Week 29, is actually much, much worse than his data at home. So based on that, and probably that alone, Bailey would be my preferred pick of the two. But Douglas Luiz as well, if you want to ignore that anomaly and just attack the penalty taker, hope that he gets into the box and gets those cutbacks from dangerous areas, then he could be your man. And at the end of the day, you're guaranteeing 90 minutes from Douglas Luiz, which you're just not getting out of Bailey. In defence, double Brentford defence there because they are the highest chance of a clean sheet statistically away from home at Burnley. I wouldn't say that that's a lock, though. Burnley do look like a team who are able and capable of scoring against pretty much anyone. So doubling up on that defence could be seen as a bit of a risk. But nonetheless, Flecken and Reguilon both seem like sensible picks on the free hit. Again, if you're playing in the optimal way, and again, you know what I mean by optimal. It's not saying that this is by far the best team or there's one way you have to play it. I think just statistically, if you played the free hit 1,000 times, this free hit would probably come out on top slightly more than most others. Porro and Doughty, again, I think they kind of pick themselves on a free hit at the moment. Porro's underlying data isn't bad. You might want to be looking at a doggy down the left-hand side as well. Now, one thing I've noticed with Spurs is that a doggy has actually been getting into more advanced areas recently, and Porro in Game Week 28 seemed to be a little bit more defensive than we've seen him recently. So again, if you wanted to chase the upside, you could look at a doggy over Porro, but Porro will be in a lot of non-free hit teams. So again, if you wanted to go on the defensive and make sure you covered off any angle of attack that the non-free hitters have and make sure that they couldn't gain ground on you, then Porro's a sensible play. Same goes for Doughty, but at home to Nottingham Forest, I do back him to do well. And to be honest, there just aren't that many defenders I like the look of. So these three do kind of pick themselves. The question mark, of course, over Reguilon's fitness is going to be there. But Brentford, I think we should get some information, some news before the deadline. If he's not fit, then we could have a look at some other Brentford assets. But for the time being, I like his attacking upside. So if he's fit, he's made it in. Looking to the bench as well, I don't want to go into this in too much depth, but Gibbs White just narrowly misses out on my favoured midfield four, but I could easily swap him in for Bailey if we got news that Bailey wasn't starting, for instance. Luton away from home again, Gibbs White, decent player to have. Nottingham Forest, I think, are being slightly overlooked on the free hit. So Gibbs White, Elanga, those kind of players could be interesting. The rest is basically padding. We're expecting all of these 11 players to start, maybe barring Reguilon if you're wanting to risk him. So the likes of Konza, Kaminsky and Taylor, I'm not really expecting to come in here. And again, you might want to bolster that subs bench with as much quality as you like, because at the end of the day, this free hit is mega cheap. I haven't even bothered putting how much it costs on the screen because there isn't a single one of you out there who won't be able to afford this. Price just will not be a factor this week. So pad that bench as much as you want. I would personally have Gibbs White and one strong midfielder or one strong 8th attacker there, just in case. And then after that, maybe one strong defender as a backup. But after that, I just don't think it matters that much. Overall, though, I think this is the team that we'll be seeing a lot of in the community and in free hits across the world this week. But I think there are other ways of attacking it. So let's have a look at what I would consider to be the all-in free hit, which is a slight tweak on what this draft is looking like. So then let's take a look at what I would consider to be the all-in version of the free hit draft. And you'll notice that a lot of the players do stay the same. But before we get into the players specifically, let me explain what I mean by this. So there are only 4 games going ahead in free hit 29, in game week 29 rather. But in all 4 of those games, I think it's fair to say that we've got a lot of clashes. So what could happen on a free hit, if you don't pay too much attention, is maybe you've got a couple of Spurs attackers, but you've also got a Fulham defender or goalkeeper. Or the same could be said for Brentford against Burnley, or most importantly, probably West Ham and Aston Villa. Now, again, if you padded your defence with an Aston Villa player, but also went for Bowen up in the middle, then again, you're lowering your chances of a big score, because if Bowen scores, he's cancelled out the clean sheet, for example. And that could be said across the board. Again, with Luton versus Nottingham Forest, if Nottingham Forest score and you've got Morgan Gibbs White or Elanga in your team, obviously you're very happy because it's likely they're one of the players who've scored. But if Doughty or Kaminsky gets that clean sheet ruined, then their upside is limited as well. So you could find yourself in a little bit of a predicament if you have two players who go up against each other directly for points. So one would be looking for the clean sheet, the other would be looking for attacking returns. What the all-in draft is trying to do is predicting what we think is going to happen in game week 29, and that will be based on your own personal opinion. This is much more of an example than anything else, and I'm sure if you were to look at all 4 of those fixtures, you come to your own conclusions. However, this free hit with the all-in is based on what I would consider to be quite likely to happen in my own personal point of view. Now, there are only 3 changes to the starting lineup compared to the optimal free hit draft that I mentioned earlier. Those 3 changes are Kaminsky comes in goal, and obviously that takes out Flecken. But what I have done is also brought in Roslev alongside Reguilon in the back 3. Now that gives me that double Brentford defence still, away from home against Burnley. And then in midfield, I've gone all out on Spurs attack and gone for Johnson alongside Maddison and Son. Now, the reason I've done this, again, is because I'm considering this as an all-in draft. So I'm backing Spurs to do really well from an attacking point of view, to get lots of goals against Fulham. But also, I'm not heavily backing them to get a clean sheet. So if I was to go with Porro or a Doggy, then obviously I'm hoping for them to get the clean sheet. But if I'm going all in and I'm trying to predict what that result is going to be, I think personally it could be a 3-1 to Spurs, maybe even a 2-1 to Spurs, something like that. But I do feel like Fulham have a very good chance at home of scoring against Spurs. With that in mind, if I went for Porro or a Doggy, then my upside is slightly limited. But if I back the Spurs midfielders to all do really well, all I then need to do is pick the correct 3. And Johnson obviously isn't nailed for minutes, and this is a risk. And he does also appear in my differentials 15 as well. But Johnson has been playing really well recently. And if he started again, then this midfield 3 of Spurs, I would back to do really well in the free hit. Again, this is an all-in version, probably not optimal. But if you're trying to back the fixtures, then Spurs midfielders could be a good way of going. Now, the other thing that I've tried to do here is predict all of the 3 other results. Now, Nottingham Forest away from home at Luton, you could argue could go the other way. So I've clearly backed Luton to do well there. I've tripled up on Luton in this team, 2 defenders as well. So I'm heavily reliant on them keeping a clean sheet for this draft to work out well. Now, obviously, you might be of the opinion that Nottingham Forest are going to do well against Luton. Maybe Luton are just going to concede a couple of goals as well. If that's the case, then your version of an all-in free hit draft might include some more Nottingham Forest midfielders or possibly defenders if you don't think that they're going to concede against Luton. But again, this is just an example. If I back Luton to do well at home against Nottingham Forest, and again, they've been decent at home this season, then Morris makes a lot of sense as a penalty taker. Doughty's got upside from an attacking point of view, but also if he keeps that clean sheet, which I'm backing them to do in this version of the draft, then again, the upside is massive because I'm doubling up on their potential clean sheet with Kaminsky as well. And if they do, Kaminsky is likely to get some save points and maybe even some bonus points as well. So there's high upside if it goes the way that I'm predicting. Now, moving on as well, a couple of other results that I'm backing heavily here. Now, I'm also backing Brentford to do well against Burnley. And not only that, but I'm clearly backing them to do well defensively. As I mentioned earlier, I actually do think there's a decent chance of Burnley getting some sort of goal attacking return against Brentford. However, in this version of the draft, I would begrudgingly admit that, or not admit, I'm not against Brentford in any way, but I'm going to say that they are the most likely team to keep a clean sheet. So I'm going to back them heavily to do so. So having 2 Brentford defenders, and again, hoping that they keep the clean sheet. If they do, then there's high upside there for me. I'm doubled up on their defence, which will be more than most people. And then also, again, if I back them to score at all, Tony is the most likely to do so. And I'm very happy to own him as a penalty taker against Burnley, who are a very porous defence. Now, outside of that, again, the only other fixture that I need to work out, which I think is the most difficult one to work out, is West Ham versus Aston Villa. Now, I'm backing with this version of the draft for Villa to get the win, but by no means am I backing them to get the clean sheet. And that is why I've not got any Villa defenders or West Ham defenders, because I think they'll lose, in this draft. Now, again, you might be of a completely opposite opinion. You might think that West Ham win at home against Villa. Maybe you thought Villa looked a little bit shaky against Spurs in game week 28. That's absolutely fine. Your version of an all-in free hit draft might be backing West Ham more heavily. And then you could maybe look at Bowen. You could look at Kudus as well. Maybe you want to back their defence if you think Villa don't score. And that kind of way of thinking goes on. And basically what I would advise you to do if you wanted to go in for the most upside you could possibly get this week, write down the 4 fixtures, try and have a go at predicting how you think they're going to go. Not whether one team's going to win or not, but also how many goals do you think there are going to be in the game? Do you think one team is likely to get a clean sheet? Do you think that one team has a differential in it that you think is going to do well as a matchup in that specific match? If so, write them all down and try and create your own all-in free hit draft based on your predictions. Because at the end of the day, the free hit is the opportunity to really put your money where your mouth is and go all in with the highest possible upside. This is a slightly riskier way of playing the free hit, but I do really like it. So let me know in the comments below whether or not my reasoning has tempted you to have a different take on the free hit and try to predict those results. So finally, let's take a look at the differentials free hit draft. And to be honest, I haven't even bothered putting the captaincy or vice captaincy on this free hit because I don't think there's any standout option for 1. And for 2, I wouldn't expect anyone to actually go ahead with this full 15 as their free hit draft. I mentioned earlier that there are a few important players that I'd probably try to include no matter what. The likes of Son, Watkins, maybe you could stretch it to someone like Bowen as well if you think West Ham are going to do well. Those sort of players I probably wouldn't want to go without. However, if you wanted to sprinkle in a few of these differentials, maybe I'm only able to convince you on one or two, or maybe I'm able to convince you on some more of them as well, then I would say all of these in their own right, on their own day, could do well this week. And I think we're just forgetting about them because there's quite a clear path to a favoured 11 at the moment. However, these guys could do well. So at the end of this section, just let me know in the comments below if you've been tempted by any single one of these, because if you have, I'd have done my job here. So let's have a look at the keepers first. The two I've recommended here are Leno at home to Tottenham and Sells away to Luton. Now let's start off with Leno. And again, we're not expecting a clean sheet for them against Tottenham, but on the off chance they did, I think it's very, very likely that he's going to be keeping a lot of saves. If they were to keep a clean sheet, we're not looking at a 6-pointer for Leno. It's very likely going to be a 10-pointer, maybe even plus, because the amount of saves he would have to keep in order to keep Spurs out, who take a lot of shots, who create a lot of chances, Leno would have to have a blinder and therefore would be very high on the bonus, high on the save points. So again, if you want to attack upside, I don't think Leno's a bad pick. Obviously, it's very unlikely he keeps a clean sheet, though, so he will be a differential. Sells as well. I think Luton are pretty likely to score, but they're not the best attack in the world, and Nottingham Forest haven't been too bad at the back either. So again, if you fancy someone who will have next to zero ownership with a decent enough chance of a clean sheet, probably the second or the third best chance of a clean sheet this week, Sells could be the way to go. Now, looking at the back line, Matty Cash has been extremely frustrating for owners this season. But again, if he doesn't start or maybe gets reduced minutes in the Europa Conference League in the midweek, then again, you might back him to start this week. And if you back him to start, you're probably backing him to get quite a few points as well against West Ham. He will bomb forward. He will get chances in and around the box as well, and cutbacks from crosses to the likes of Douglas Luiz, for example. So again, high upside. He's been incredibly frustrating. You definitely don't want to own him much longer than just 1 week. But if it's just for 1 week and you back him to start, then he could be a high upside defender for you in a field of very limited upside defenders. Another one I'd look at is a doggy. Now, I mentioned him earlier on as well, so I won't go into him too much, but I did mention that he has been getting into those very advanced positions down the left wing, cutting inside and finding himself in quite good positions in and around the box. So again, if you wanted to differentiate yourself from the very popular Pedro Porro, a doggy could be the way to go. Now, moving across, Murillo, again, this is backing the clean sheet for Nottingham Forest against Luton. He's looked pretty decent moving forwards as well. He's had a few advanced runs through the middle of the pitch and found himself in decent areas throughout the season as well. So again, if you fancy a little bit of luck being on your side this week, Murillo could be the way to go. Wrapping up the defence, on the bench, I've got Kurt Zouma, who normally I wouldn't really be recommending in FPL, but Aston Villa have been poor from set pieces recently, and obviously Zouma is very good in the air. So if you back him to do well, then maybe he could be a differential option. But even in the differential 11, I don't think he's quite strong enough to be a starting option for me. The same goes for Digne, and this again could be relevant to Moreno instead. Basically, the player that I think will be most likely to start will be the one who doesn't start in the midweek. So this kind of could be Digne or Moreno, but whoever doesn't start in midweek is basically my recommendation here. Either have good upside from an attacking point of view. They get into really advanced areas at the back post from crosses as well. So whoever starts this match, I think, is a decent pick. But at this point, we just don't know which one it's going to be. So they will remain very, very differential. Moving into the midfield, Johnson I mentioned earlier as well. Again, if you back him to start, I think he's a very strong differential. He's been playing pretty well for Spurs recently. And if you think Spurs are going to do well against Fulham, I quite like him as a differential 1 week punt. Elanga as well, he didn't start in game week 28, which is going to stop a lot of people from going there. But I do expect him to come back into the starting 11 again. And if he does, again, away from home at Luton, I think is a decent attacking fixture for Nottingham Forest. He could be a differential you might be interested in. Kudus against Villa at home, I think most people, again, on a free hit, not on a free hit, will go for Bowen. He will be the preferred West Ham midfielder, and I do agree with that logic. However, either Paquetá or Kudus in any given week could outscore Bowen. You know that they've got the attacking upside. Kudus in particular has been very explosive at times. So if you favour him to do well against that Aston Villa high line, then he could be the pick over Bowen if you wanted to go really differential, if you were chasing rank, if you, for whatever reason, just didn't fancy Bowen, but you did want a chunk of that West Ham attack, Kudus in midfield could be a pretty interesting differential. Another one that will be looked at by absolutely nobody will be Yuri Tielemans. Now, in seasons past, he's been good for the odd goal, he's been good for the odd assist, but obviously hasn't been a regular starter for Aston Villa. However, I think given the fact that John McGinn got red carded and they've got their own injuries in and around the midfield as well, I think Tielemans could be a very interesting option. He's pretty likely to start. He probably won't be in a particularly advanced role, but I'd actually suggest that Douglas Luiz is the more likely one to sit back, especially away from home, and it might give Tielemans, if he should start the game, more license to go forward and be on those cutbacks from the wide positions. If so, he could be the 1 week punt that you're looking for. He could be a really, really big differential upside pick that most weeks wouldn't be of interest to us, but 1 week only, maybe if you back him to start, which I personally do, he could be interesting. Now, the only other midfielder I've got here, the fifth midfielder, is Alex Iwobi. Now, again, Spurs at home, not the best fixture ever, but he's actually looked really good for Fulham recently. And again, if you wanted someone maybe as that fifth midfielder on your bench, Iwobi has decent upside, and I don't mind him as an option either. Now, moving into the forward line, and this is probably where I'm most excited. And to start off, Fofana at home to Brentford, I think is actually a pretty decent shout. He's actually looked pretty good recently. Obviously got the goal in game week 28, and he's getting decent minutes too. And for some reason, I've just got this sneaky suspicion that Brentford will concede to Burnley. If that is the case, Fofana's pretty likely to be the one on the end of it, and he'll be picked by almost nobody. So if you back some sort of upset, if you back the fact that Brentford actually probably won't keep the clean sheet, then Fofana could be the way to go. Yoane Wissa as well, Burnley away from home. Again, the opposite side of this card that I'm talking about at the moment, the opposite side of the fixture. Wissa has done really well recently. I think it's 3 goals in his last 3, and he's been getting decent minutes. Now, the one issue with Wissa is that he probably won't get 90 minutes any week. So we're looking at limited minutes on him. But when he's on the pitch, he actually looks pretty decent. Again, he's playing off of Ivan Toney, so Toney will be the target man, the talisman. But if you think that he's going to play more of a holding striker and play the little balls round the corner for the likes of Wissa or maybe Mapai, then whichever player you fancy to start, and I personally fancy Wissa at the moment considering the form he's in, I think he could be a decent shout against a very weak defence. Finally, Muniz has also been really red hot recently for Fulham. So again, if you think Spurs concede, which is perfectly reasonable to do, I think there is a decent chance that Spurs concede against Fulham. Muniz is looking like a really decent pickup at a very cheap price at the moment. So not that price is an issue on this free hit draft at all, but if you, for whatever reason you didn't fancy one of Morris or Toney, then Muniz could be an option for you. And again, he will be extremely differential. So that runs through the 15 players that I'd have my eye on. So again, this is not a full free hit draft that I'd go out and say, these are the 15 for me, I'm going to start them and hope that the free hit pays off. Because I think if you did that, it's quite likely that most of these picks in combination don't outscore what are the preferred picks. However, 1, 2, maybe 3 of them could do much better than some of the more optimal picks that we've been discussing earlier. So do let me know in the comments below whether any of them I've been able to tempt you on, and if I did, then I would consider it a job well done. So thank you so much for watching my 3 different free hit drafts ahead of game week 29. Hopefully that helps to set you up and give you something else to think about ahead of the deadline. In the meantime, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated. But I'll see you later on this week as we set up my non-free hit team for game week 29.